Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for another live episode of Teachers for Teachers. That's you, moms and dads. I'm Dr. Dejana, and I'm here again with my friend and colleague, Dr. Leah. And today, Leah, what are we talking about today?
Well, today is a continuation of our conversation from last week about how to raise culturally sensitive children and how to educate them in a culturally sensitive way. And I have to tell you, some of this exploration for me has really challenged some of the premises that I have held through my life. And I think that's probably true for a lot of people if we're willing to be honest with ourselves. And I grew up in an area of Canada that was 67% Black in the community that I grew up in, because it was sort of the foot of what was considered the Underground Railroad. So I'm always like so surprised at myself when I come across something that I was unaware of, or in an unconscious bias. So I'm really happy to dive into this, and it's an ongoing conversation.
Absolutely. And we're so happy that we have an amazing panel to join us as we continue this conversation to bring different lenses and different perspectives and different, expertise to kind of help us navigate. So first off, I'd like to introduce our very, very special guest. It's Layla Marchbanks. Layla is the creator of A Book at the Table, a fifth grade teacher and a graduate from the University of Southern California. She holds a BS in kinesiology and a master's in communication management. Thank you so much again, Layla, for joining us and helping us create a space to have this conversation here on Teachers for Teachers. Additionally, I'd like to also welcome Anne. Anne, go ahead and wave for everybody out there. Anne McMullen is an education consultant based in Los Angeles. She works throughout the United States and internationally as a public speaker, writer, and consultant with a focus on leadership. She's the project director for COSIN's Empowered Superintendents program and the author of Life Lessons in Leadership. Thank you so much, Layla. Thank you so much, Anne, for joining us again. And then Jamie, can you go ahead and give us a little wave so they can see you there? I'd like to introduce Jamie Wagner, a fifth grade teacher and math specialist. She has a triple master's degree in psychology, education, and marriage and family therapy. She applies all of those degrees as a teacher, a therapist, a parent, and a wife. What an amazing panel we have, right?
Indeed, we do. And I think it would be really interesting to start this conversation with Leila just sort of giving us a little bit of background on how you came to this and what you think the impact of bringing this to the classroom is.
My project has actually been in the works for maybe a little over 2 years now. I definitely saw the need for different literature in my own classroom, as being a head teacher and knowing what I was teaching in the classroom and having sons of my own. And I was like, hey, my kids are going to probably be in my class soon. And I knew what the information that I'm presenting at home. And I'm like, this is the same information that I want to present in the classroom as well. So I was able to change a lot of the core literature and book club books in our fifth grade class to match the children that look in what they look like in the class. A lot of the students actually want to see themselves in this literature, and they also want to know about others' experiences that don't look like them. And some of the books that I've incorporated, they were written within the past 2 to 3 years. So these students not only look like them, but they act like them. They're having the same experiences that students are having currently, instead of being books that were written back in the 50s or the 60s, which had a different experience, obviously, for a fifth grade student. Also, after seeing the positive feedback that I got from a lot of the students, there were students that were, going to their math class and reading during math and reading on the field, and they were like, "We love these books so much. When's the next time that our book club starts, or when's the next time our next core literature book is coming up?" And parents thanking me for having this literature in the class, that that their children are being seen. So I wanted to share this information and this research with other parents and educators and students across the country. Even if across the world, hopefully it gets there too. but I made this website so that parents and teachers and students can find books, diverse books according to their grade level. So a lot of times you go on these websites and they suggest a lot of diverse books, but is this the right book for a fifth grader? Is this the right book for a second grader? Is this the right book for an 11th or 12th grader? So I'm taking out the middleman for them to, find the correct grade level. And I'm also offering discussion guides and novel studies and lesson plans for these books as well, because when you bring these books into the classroom, you also want to be able to teach these books appropriately and have the right historical background with these books so they have the largest impact.
Mm-hmm. I see Jamie looking to say something.
I think too, it's important to note that what Layla does is also give us books that are appropriate and well written. And I think it's easy, especially when you're not a person of color, to go to a bookstore or library and see children of color on the cover of the book and think, oh, this must be a great book. But just because the story has people of color in it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a story that is growing the understanding of different cultures or is even a realistic portrayal of that particular group. So I think that Layla's ability to go through and sort of cultivate options for everyone that are both enriching and appropriate, wholly appropriate. So when you are spending time trying to learn about another culture, if you have the passion to do so, your energies are put in the right direction. And I think books from all ages, I think it's so wonderful to be able to have that as a resource.
That's a really good point. I think, Dejana, I said you wanted to say something, please.
Oh, I just had a quick question. I think it would be nice for our viewers to hear, what are some of the benefits or outcomes that students get from engaging in a learning experience that includes these type of stories and this type of literature and this type of book? I think it's really important that we spend some time and talk about that. Like when your young child is exposed to this and that becomes a part of their learning, their classroom, their education, what do we see at the end? Like, what are some of the outcomes? I know I want my children to be culturally competent, and I also want my children to be culturally responsive. And this might be a tool that can help lead to that outcome. So I thought I just wanted to throw that out there for the panel. What are some of the benefits, the actual benefits that your student or children receive by being exposed to this type of literature?
Well, the first benefit is, especially for children of color that have been marginalized for so long, to be able to come into a classroom and see their main the main literature in their classroom have protagonists that look like them and are portraying them in a positive light. That's one of the major benefits. The second benefit is for children of non-color to be able to empathize and understand, different cultures from, all around the world, and not even just, different races. There's different religions, there's different sexualities, there's different genders, there's a whole spectrum of experiences that these children are going through, and it's giving them a window into another child's life or into another person's life to develop that empathy. So, for example, I have a whole bunch of experiences that I've actually, light bulb moments that have gone off in my classroom. There was actually this past year, I had a student, which was a white male, and he read Ghost Boys by Joel Parker Rhodes. And he wrote an essay. And in his essay, he talked about how he didn't have any idea what it was like for a Black boy to grow up and be afraid of the police. That's not something that is his reality. And how much empathy he developed for his own classmates when, he's having birthday parties. He's like, well, when I have birthday parties now, we won't, I won't invite them out to a park to play with Nerf guns. Or, if my classmates are telling me that this doesn't make them feel comfortable or something doesn't make them feel right, then I know that I can say, hey, this is something that, bothers my classmates, and I'll stop, or I'll tell other people, how it's making my classmates feel. Also, I have books in my class about gender spectrum. In fifth grade, it's not about sexuality. It's just about, gender identity. And a lot of students at the time, they had no idea what it meant to be a trans person or what it meant to have gender on a spectrum. So when they're reading this literature, they're saying, oh, this is what it's like to experience something like this. So it's real. It's not fake. It's not, it's not a mental disease, and they're able to prevent hate in the future. So maybe when they do, if they do experience a person like this in middle school or in high school, they're not, saying rude things or mean things. It actually, you're trying to prevent hate in the elementary years before they're actually having these, major experiences as middle school, high school, and as adults.
Really fabulous. Thank you. Anne, I see you.
Yeah, I just applaud Layla so much. I think back to the time, before I got into the whole ed tech space, I was a US history teacher for 18 years. And my goodness, I wish I had had those kind of resources at that time. And Leah, I was thinking about what you said. You grew up and you're realizing your whole thinking you thought was one way, but there was so much you didn't know. And I'm feeling that way right now also. I mean, I've always thought of myself as an empathetic person and color didn't matter, but oh my goodness, I've learned so much more. And it's important that we all learn more. And Layla, one of the things I was actually reading today had to do with the issue of history textbooks, and that it may be time to get rid of history textbooks, because it's clear. I mean, the textbook adoption process in any state is a political process, as to how textbooks get decided. And in fact, in this piece I was reading, and again, I taught in Texas and I now live in California, and this piece was giving the example that you could read about an event in a textbook that was used in Texas and read the same event in a California textbook, and it's going to be covered differently. So what they were talking about was the importance of teachers just pulling together multiple resources. And if I had had your resources, Layla, at that time, to be able to pull those books in, to use those in a classroom situation, I just think it would be so powerful. So on behalf of teachers everywhere, thank you. I think you put a tremendous resource together for people who are going to have to struggle to do things a little bit differently. So to have it listed and itemized and illustrated in the way it is on your website is a tremendous gift. Thank you.
Well, and shout out to Jamie, actually. Working with her, there's something that I always remember, that history has been written by the winners. So for all this time, we've been reading history from the winner's point of view. And it's funny because at our school, we had a new director that came in, and she was British. And so we talked to her about learning about the American Revolution. And she's like, that's not what we teach in Britain. It's totally different. So it is like, whose experience are we teaching in these history books? And we really have to reevaluate that.
So true. I also think the idea of, we promised in the last conversation that we would talk about the book of Jamie has a burning question or comment.
Well, I had a great segue actually right into that, because as Dejana asked about what is the outcome of kids reading this literature and seeing it, and really what I see in my own children too is that if they're reading books about other cultures and other people and other people's experiences from the time that they're young, it's all very normal. It's normal that this house does things differently than this house, and it's not weird or bad or any way like that. It's just normal. And I think part of the issue with the children's books, when we talk about how polka dot people and plaid people and striped people and all of these people can get along, kids don't see people that are polka dot and striped and plaid. But they do see people that are all different shades of browns and all different shades of yellows and all different shades of peaches. And so if that's where we start with literature, we don't have to, I don't necessarily want to say dumb it down, but we don't have to kidify it for it to be meaningful to kids. They don't have to be stuffed animals and Muppets in order for children to learn something from it. These books that Layla has put together, is cultivated for on her website, allow us to have these great stories. And it's not like, oh, today we're reading an African-American story. It's today we're reading a story about a duck. And it happens to be an African-American family that is talking about the duck. Or, we have a great one about a snowstorm. And so we read about a snowstorm, and it happens to be an African-American family and their experience, but it's not, you're not setting aside time to allot to this or to allot to that. You're enjoying literature where you are being immersed and learning about all of these different cultures and kinds of people.
That's really helpful. And it is a great segue into the Purple People conversation, because I think we all agree that Kristen Bell had the best of intentions in writing her book.
I wonder, Leila, have you reached out to her?
No, I haven't, but I have noticed that her book dropped off the New York Times bestseller list, and I'm sure that had to do with a lot of the backlash. But it was number one 2 weeks ago on the New York Times children's bestseller list, and it was it was a little, like I said before, a little cringeworthy when I read the book because I know what I teach in my home, and I want my sons to be very proud of their black skin and be very educated and strong, but I don't want them to think that it's not okay to see color. I want them to see everyone else's color. I want them to see everyone else's religion and differences and actually accept them for their differences. My sons ask me questions all the time. My oldest son actually asked me a question the other night. He asked me if gay people could have babies, and I said yes, they can. So it might have been an odd conversation, and he probably didn't understand anything that I was talking to him about with science. But what he received from that conversation was gay people can have babies just like a heterosexual couple, and that's all that I wanted to get across to him. I don't want him to, he can see the difference, that yes, they are different from my mom and my dad, but I still accept them, and that's fine. And when I get older, and I talking to my friends, if I hear my friends saying something negative, then I can correct them. So that's what I'm striving for in my house. I don't want my sons to think that, oh, we can all be purple people and we don't have to see differences, because then that just defeats the purpose of, what we're trying to achieve. I remember last week you asked me, or maybe it was Dejana that asked me, what can teachers, what can they do in their classrooms, or how can teachers be allies in their classrooms? And I remember saying it was really important, especially because books like that will come out and a teacher will say, hey, that's a great book, I'm going to bring it into my classroom and then read it to my students, and then say they're students of color in this classroom, and they go home and tell their parents, and their parents will go, no, that's not really the message that I want to send across in my home. So it's really important to make sure that you have the right literature in your classroom and you're teaching it the correct way. I actually just found out about an author. Her name is Nick Stone. She's actually one of my favorite authors. She's the writer of Clean Getaway and Dear Martin. They're both books that are listed on my website. And she is hosting all week this week, and you actually can go on her Instagram and see all of the old lessons. It's called Decolonize Your Classroom, and she's meeting with all different authors like Jason Williams and Kwame Alexander and all of these great known authors, and they're talking about how you can decolonize your classroom all the way from kindergarten to 12th grade. So I think Monday was kindergarten through second, and then yesterday was third through fourth, and then they're going all the way up to high school for the rest of the week. So if you go to Nick Stone, it's NICSTONE on Instagram, you can watch all of her series. They're a 1 hour series every night, and I've been like watching and taking notes, and it's so informative. And I mean, there are things that I'm even learning, that I'm going to be implementing into my classroom as well, because I'm learning all the time.
That is so great to hear. And I did notice that as you were saying that, everyone was jotting it down. So we were all old school on that one. We're not going to miss that.
My son is actually reading Clean Getaway right now. I just had it on the table. It's a beautiful novel. The protagonist is actually going on like a getaway with his grandmother, and they're driving through the South, and she's talking to him about the Green Book, and she's explaining all of the different places where she wasn't able to go when she was his age, and how they had to use this Green Book to let them know, the hotels where they could stay, or even restaurants where they can eat, or bathrooms they could use. And so the book is so beautifully written, and he's trying to understand, like, this is how my grandmother lived, and then what are the repercussions that are happening to him in his life. It's a great book. I suggested it for fourth grade. So my son is going into fourth grade, so he reads about 2 chapters a day, and he has a lot of questions, and they're questions that I love to have conversations about.
You made me think about also the importance of films and telling these stories. And I'm, again, I'll claim Canadian as my ignorance in some of these topics, but I had no idea about the Green Book until the movie came out. And I heard all of the problems with the movie and the way they portrayed the character, but the good news was that it really did inform a lot of people of the fact that this was real, that this existed. So I wonder if you use that in the classroom. And Jamie, I saw you had something you wanted to say.
We certainly do talk about that in the classroom. And I also, and I don't think I can plead Canadian since I've been here since I was 18, but I didn't know about the Green Book. And when I learned about redlining, maybe a couple of years ago, I remember being astounded that could actually have, and I'd heard the term redlining, but once I saw something and read about what it actually was, I had to read about it a couple different times in a couple different places to really understand, because it felt like one of those things where I thought, I'm not reading this right. I can't be understanding what this is saying. That can't be, but it is. So I think there are a lot of things like that I think people are more open to learning about them now, and to not embracing them, but into learning and understanding them, rather than just, yeah, okay, moving on. But it's actually learning. And one thing I wanted to say about some of the book choices, especially with kids, is I also don't think every person of color's experience is the same as every other person of color's experience. So one thing that I noticed in one of the books that Leila had recommended to the fifth graders that I read about a year ago was that I was reading a book called Blended, which was a wonderful piece of literature. But it was about a little girl whose mom was white and dad is black, and they go through a divorce. And I, learned a lot of stuff, and it was a really interesting book. But something that struck me is I am a child of divorce. And learning about this child's experience of divorce and how it made her feel, and that she felt she didn't have a home because she was at mom's house at this time, dad's house at this time. So she didn't actually have a home. She went back and forth between two different homes. So having been a child of divorce myself, I think, I can relate to anybody who's been through divorce. I understand that I could learn something so simple about something I experienced myself and have a moment of, oh my gosh, imagine that. Imagine what we can learn about other cultures, but also imagine what people of color can learn about each other's experiences in a very compassionate way. So I think it's a wonderful time for all of us to be able to learn and to embrace and understand that, as much as the United States in history has really said, oh, you're Native American, so you can go live in this group because you all get along. Meanwhile, all of those tribes war with each other. Oh, you're brown, so you can go in this section because all of you are that same color, so you must all get along. I think if we embrace this sort of idea of reading about everybody and enjoying everybody and not having to feel like you make it a point you just enjoy, I think that's really powerful. And I think people are more open to it now than I've seen in my lifetime, at least.
Absolutely. One of the things that I am going to be working on in my classroom, and I'm going to just say it out loud here, I'm going to be working on decentering whiteness in my classroom. As educators, as a young person that grew up in America and got trained to be a teacher in this country, everything that I teach my children in my classroom has been zoomed in on whiteness. And so one of the things that I'm going to be working on this year specifically as a Black educator, I'm still working on these things too, is what exactly does that look like, and how can I be intentional about that in my classroom, and really looking at everything I do, all the stories I tell, all the people I highlight, and see how can I actually decenter that whiteness so that we can see the whole story here. It's not just that one story. There are many stories, and that's something that I'm going to be focusing on and looking for resources. And one of the things with my young children, my own personal kids that are young, that I'm telling myself is that little kids can learn big things. Like, we don't need to shelter them and wait until later. Although they're little, they can learn big things. And how do we do that? How do we as parents, how do we as teachers facilitate that? I think it's by being truthful. We need to learn what the truth is. We need to tell the truth. We need to teach the truth. We need to speak the truth, and we need to live the truth. And I'm really convinced that if I stick to that in my daily practice as a parent and in my classroom as an educator, I will be effective in disrupting the default by sticking to, like, let me just tell you the truth. And I think families all across America right now, because of the George Floyd protests, this new movement that we find ourselves in, the children are watching. We need to tell them the truth. You know what I mean?
That's such a good point, Dejana, and such a good direction. And you know, we are going to be checking back in on the progress in the classroom on a regular basis on this topic. And I also wonder, like, what, well, Leila, what books do you recommend to adults that we're trying? And I don't mean, I mean the kind of well-meaning, liberal, you know, who just who we want to, we don't know where to start.
Right. Well, I do have a tab on, well, a page on my website that's for educators and parents. And I think I mentioned the last time, it's not a coincidence that I have White Fragility listed first, you know, on the website, because that's actually one of my favorites. And it's not just for white people, it is also for continuing education in the community of color as well. And also there's actually another book that I'm going to be adding to the website. I hadn't had a chance to read it yet, so I never want to put something on my website that I haven't personally read or experienced myself, but it's called Me and White Supremacy by Leila Said. And it's so funny. As soon as I finished the book, a faculty member where I work, she suggested the book to read to our faculty as well. So it's a really good book. And I know some of these titles, especially like How to Be an Anti-Racist, it can be really scary sometimes. It's like, I'm not racist. I don't need to learn how to be anti-racist, but it's more learning the background and learning what, you know, not being complicit, because yes, you might not be racist, but what are you doing to combat the racism around you, or, you know, where you work or where you live or people around you? Are you sitting around while something is happening and, you know, people are continuously being marginalized around you and, you know, you're not doing anything? Or are you a teacher and are you continuously teaching the microaggressions in the classroom? And it's a constant circle and a cycle, and it's not getting any better. So that's what these books are about, to help you realize what you're missing in your life. And also there's another one, Blind Spot. I can't believe I forgot. I never forget authors' names, but Blind Spot is also for everyone. It's for everyone to realize their implicit bias. Whether you see a certain person, what do you think about that type of person? If you see a certain student, what do you think about that type of student? And I learned about my implicit biases in the classroom. If I see a student, I'm like, oh, I know that student's going to talk so much and you know, just continuously talk and talk. I'm like, I'm not going to call on that student for this because I don't have a lot of time left in my classroom. But a lot of these books are just for continuing education for everyone and not just the community of non-color.
Well, it's a great time for all of us to be educating ourselves. And the more, I mean, even on, I love Dear White People.
Oh, the TV show?
I didn't realize until I was already a big fan that it's a Larry Wilmore's production. And I'm a huge fan of Larry Wilmore since The Daily Show. And so it's an opportunity to hear a little bit of what's in the room when we're not there, right? When there's freedom of just conversation and some of it is a bit like, oh yeah, I recognize that. I would like to stop doing that or stop saying that, or yeah, I could correct myself on that one. And you know, it's
one of the things I just wanted to add on to that, whether it's, you know, movies or books or literature, I find a lot of people are mobilizing and finding a platform like book clubs. So I really think there's a huge value if you embark in getting educated and learning more about topics around racism and being an anti-racist. What is an ally? What is a co-conspirator? To go in and find one of these books and find a community of people that want to do this work too, and engage in community as you go through it. I mean, a lot of this work is identity work that you have to do within yourself, but it's always nice to be going through that work with other people looking at themselves as well. Because really, in my opinion, a lot of this anti-racist work starts with us figuring out who we are and what our biases are and how we show up in the world, so that we can then be open to taking action and seeing the things that are around us and deciding that's not okay and this is what I'm going to do. So here we are. We formulated a community right here Teachers for Teachers, that's you, moms and dads, but really any group of people that are like, I really want to learn more about this. I want more information. Get a group together. Use Zoom, use social media, have this conversation, sit in this uncomfortable space, because if we sit in this space right now, let me tell you, change will happen, and we're going to be creating a better tomorrow for our students, for sure.
So true. So well said, Dejana. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for being with us. Thank you, Anne and Leila and Jamie. And we'll see you again next week. Have a happy 4th of July, everybody.